Well, great conversations are a highway that can enable customer journeys to be driven towards exciting new directions. In times of digital transformation, sped up in large part due to the pandemic, AI is transforming conversational messaging between companies and customers from a science to an art. Across channels and verticals, companies are leveraging the power of chatbots or virtual assistants to improve CX, address customer complaints, and offer instant answers to a variety of customer queries. Now, the magic during this interaction comes from the increasing levels of personalization that molds customer experience in real time as silos across a company's front and back end operations disappear and enable a single brand identity to emerge in front of the customer. From digital marketing to human resources, customer service to product support, the power of intelligent conversations is expanding at the speed of light to help companies go where not many have gone before. The question is how to use it for building and scaling CX for your enterprise. Let's find out. I'm your host Gautam Srinivasan, and joining me in this episode of the Mint CX Conversations are top voices from industry who will share their insights on the topic of conversational AI, cracking the code to intelligent conversations. Let me quickly introduce them to you, starting with Karan Mehta, co-founder and CTO at Kisht, which is a digitally powered platform that provides quick and easy credit financing to customers across India. Praval Singh, VP for Marketing and Customer Experience at Zoho, which provides a powerful suite of tools for everything that you need to run a business. Manisha Bafna, who's the VP of Customer Success for Data Science and Healthcare Consulting at CTS Techs, which helps healthcare organizations reinvent themselves by accelerating their digital transformation efforts, and Beeraj Sheth, who's the CEO at Gupshup, a leading conversational messaging platform that serves small and large businesses in emerging markets. So as you can see, we have a panel featuring a cross section of industries. So you can look forward to learning from a variety of routes taken to crack the code for intelligent conversations between companies and customers. So let's start with you, Praval. You've worked at the intersection of technology and marketing, and interestingly, you worked remotely for nearly a decade. So from your viewpoint, how has the nature of conversational messaging changed across a customer's life cycle? And what's working in terms of, say, improved interactions with customers, especially when it comes to solidifying a company's brand image while also deepening the engagement?
Thank you, Gautam. I think the way we are trying to do business and the way we look at customers approaching a business for a need, be it buying, be it a B2B world or a B2C world, all of us are now glued to our mobile devices. All of us want information available to us, curated and available to us at all times. And we don't often have the patience to dig through the same information the way we were comfortable doing, let's say 5, 7, 10 years ago. Now, what that has led to is businesses like ours, we have to think about how do we elevate that customer experience across all touch points. Now, when I say that, what I mean is today customers don't necessarily always want to engage with brands to begin with, because everybody is bombarded with messages and advertisements and whatnot. When they do, when customers really want to engage with a brand, it's already a success, I would say. Brands have the onus on them to make that experience worthwhile, right? And that is how the whole discussion around customer experience, conversational messaging, and all of that stems out from. Now, let's think about what is the problem usually that businesses are trying to solve for when we talk about customer experience in these scenarios. I would say the first problem and the larger problem here is customers should not feel like they're talking to a department when they're talking to an individual or a company. Oftentimes we were used to the kind of customer service, for example, where the ticket would be passed from a department A to B to C, and your calls get routed, and then we were used to all of that, right? But now customers don't really care about which department you're from, right? So customers don't care how the company is structured. They want to talk to someone, more often a human being, I would say. And how do we address that as a company? How do we break our internal silos as a company? I think that's an important part. And for that, I think the two things that are important. One is we need a unified view of our customer records, where all touch points from email, social media, IoT now, support, CRM, all that sort of intersect and provide what you can call a 360-degree view of a customer, right? For example, let's say I, as a company or representing a company, I see a tweet from an unhappy customer, right? How soon can I contextually look at information about that customer? When did the customer join? How was the previous interaction of the company with the customer? What is the value of the customer in the system? If all this information can come holistically in one system, I would say, right? That's, I think, from a technology standpoint, an important part to address, and a lot of companies are not doing that. Secondly, and that is, I would say, often a lot more ignored, is the employee experience. We often talk about customer experience as an outward-looking entity. Think about what does it take internally for your employees to be able to deliver that kind of customer experience, and that part is often overlooked, right? And what I'm trying to say with that is there are three challenges with current systems mostly, right? One is adoption, right? Systems exist, but people are not comfortable using it. How do we increase that part? Similarly, implementation takes a lot of time, and not every company is ready to be able to get that. Last part is every vertical, every business is different. A business in a hospitality industry works very different from manufacturing, from education, from real estate, so on and so forth. So how can we get all that for our own employees? Can we customize it? Is there a way to customize a CRM for my employees? That's, I think, something that a lot of businesses need to think about to be able to enable our employees to solve for great customer experience. And I think that is something at Zoho we're very, very passionate about and we're working towards.
All right, Biryat, let me get you in to respond to what Praval said. The last time we spoke, I believe you had said that, messaging is becoming the new digital storefront, which is helping companies overcome the app barrier when it comes to customer engagement. But from experience, some companies do it right and some not. So in terms of scaling up CX, looking at the problems which Praval has mentioned, or the challenges, what should companies do to balance engagement in an organic way that does not appear artificial or pushy?
Right. No, I think so. There were a lot of interesting points that Praval made, and I agree with that. Right. I think the way I think about it is the way businesses interact with consumers. The human customer interface is a computer interface is evolving. Right. It used to be desktop apps, then websites, then mobile apps, and now we are getting to these conversational experiences. Right. And apps are sort of, they don't work as well, because while there are millions of apps, most consumers have no more than a few dozen apps on their device, right? So especially the long tail of businesses, they don't have these means and mechanisms to engage with customers digitally. But with messaging now, whether it's through WhatsApp or SMS or any other messaging interface, it becomes easier. You can reach any customer and have that conversation. Right now, to do it right, businesses have to make that whole experience engaging. Right. Well, firstly, what's happening is virtually every customer touch point across the entire customer life cycle can be made conversational. So whether it's marketing on the front end, right, lead generation, deals, promotions can be personalized. Then in the middle is the sales and the commerce and the transaction, and then it's the after sales support and service. Right. Each of these touch points can be made conversational. I think, like Praval alluded to, people don't want to look up information from a website and a manual or something like that. They just want the answer, right? It's a little bit like when we are having this conversation and you ask me a question. I don't say here's the manual. Go figure it out. I answer it directly on point, right? And that's how. By the way, humans are trained to communicate since we were babies, right? I mean, you sort of ask a question, get an answer. So if businesses can enable that, right, which is when a user sends a query, if the business can understand the query, find the right data, and provide a contextual response, provide a personalized response, provide an instant response, I think that's when the magic happens, right? It's almost like let's take the scenario of a bank, right? Today in the offline world, banks, for their premium customers, they have these personal relationship managers, right? Imagine if using technology, the bank could offer a personal relationship manager to every customer. And this relationship manager is super intelligent, right? They know everything about the business, of course, but they also know everything about the customer, like the transaction history, the preferences, and what they're interested in, and it just provides that intelligent, personalized, very contextual response. So the customer doesn't have to repeat or provide additional context and so on. I think if businesses can sort of enable that metaphor, and the closest you can get to that ideal, and it's hard, but the closer you are to that, the more engaging that experience could be.
All right. If you could expand that answer from the products that you offer to your customers, Beat, what are some of the products which would be relevant in this context?
Oh, so I think we work with a lot of enterprises, small and large. And the way we think about it is sort of there are two main layers of the stack. The bottom layer of the stack is just the basic messaging APIs. So for example, you need to provide this on different channels. It could be on SMS, WhatsApp, RCS, Instagram, GIP, and many others, right? Skype, Telegram, and so on. There's many different channels. You need to be able to provide experiences in each of the, you have to meet the customer where they are, right? On their terms. And then once the basic connectivity is set up, then you need sort of the conversational layer on top, right? How to handle the query, analyze it. So there are conversational AI tools and capabilities, language models, pre-trained data sets and things like that. So and also then there are integrations into payment systems, into CRM systems, into other delivery systems and so on to enable commerce and so on. So all of those, there's a set of capabilities, basically everything that a business or an enterprise needs to build these conversation experiences. Sort of our goal is to provide all of that.
All right. We'll see what more can be done. I'll come to Praval again later in the conversation to see, how since, Zoho itself allows others to run their business or provides them with tools to run their businesses, whether the conversations around customer conversation is making them do some different things when it comes to CRM. Meanwhile, Karan, let me come to you. Kish being a digital platform that offers credit in the customer's bank account just 5 minutes later after instant eligibility checks. That's quite a feat. Now, such a quick turnaround time for due diligence to establish the credit worthiness of applicants, it requires the right infrastructure at the back end. So tell us a little bit more about your magic. How do you do it, and how do you use customer conversations to improve these checks, and how do you plan to do it when you expand to tier 2 and tier 3 towns and cities where data is scarce?
Thank you, Adam. Very, very happy to take you through that journey. Yeah, so for us, it's actually 5 minutes and always going down. So we are always constantly looking at the metric and just drawing on what Biru said, right? There is the pre-sales, there's the sales, and there's the post-sales. For us, for a company like Kish or a lot of the digital players in all different domains, that entire journey is crunched down to a 5-minute or a 3-minute interaction. So you're not talking about customers who are to actually experience all 3 facets in 3 minutes, and you have to be there as a company to engage with them, give them the right feedback, give them the on-the-spot answers in the right context as well. Let me quickly take you through the journey that we have at Kish, right? So there are 3 large parts to the digital journey. One is we have to capture the customer's data. The customer has to declare some basic information about himself. Here, our philosophy as a company is less is more. Have the customer declare as little information as possible, and we should have the right integrations, the right connects to pull more intelligence about the customer through a lot of integrations. This helps in a lot of ways. There are fewer input errors, possibility of the customer making inadvertent mistakes. Imagine a customer fumbling to select his date of birth from a small UI, or trying to locate his PAN card to try and enter his PAN number. So less is more. Get the customers to declare the least amount of information. The second part of the journey for us is that we validate all the data the customer has declared and try to multiply that data. Take the data the customer has provided, find other sources where we can validate it. And there are a lot of APIs, the India stack, and a lot of APIs from service providers, which allow you to get more information of the customer as well. And the third part is where the magic happens for us is the credit and fraud checks, where you take all the data of the customer, run it through the credit journey, and give the customer a loan, right? Now, within this journey, obviously, a lot of points where a customer needs to interact to figure out. And again, just to set context, all of this is happening in a 5-minute window from the time the customer has downloaded the app from the Play Store to the time the money hits his bank account. Now, customer might have a question: what do I do in case I don't have a PAN card? Or once the loan is given to the customer said, I want a loan, application form on WhatsApp, and we have told him that it's gone in your email, but customer says, I don't access my email, I want it on WhatsApp. Now just try to imagine that we do close to around 300,000 loans a month, and having a call center to answer these queries would just be impossible. And for us, the conversational bots, customer support in all the digital formats has reduced or made this even possible to begin with. I cannot imagine running a call center for the customer volumes that we deal with right now. And there is no possibility of us ever thinking of profitability if that was a situation. Everything else aside, the unit economics on the credit side aside, we would not have been able to support the unit economics only on the customer support side, which is where I think the AI bots have come to our rescue. And I think this is a story for lending. It's universally the story across all other domains as well, and has made it possible. We, at least about some 30% of our customers, within the first 5 minutes of the money getting disbursed to their bank account, their first question to us is, where do I download the account statement? And we are like, okay, there's a bot. They come and ask it and just get sent to their WhatsApp, this thing. That changes the game. That makes digital journeys possible to begin with, and they make them profitable also over the longer run.
So how does the split work between app, web, and messenger platforms? How does the split work in terms of customer conversations for you?
Right. So for us, our journeys are all app only. We have a lot of intelligence and custom in-house processing that's happening, which is not possible for us to build over a web platform. So we build it in the form of an app where a lot of the computation is happening on the device of the customer itself. In terms of the customer interacting with us, there are two large channels that we are heavily banked on. And we have done that by just listening to the customers interacting with us. One is we have a chatbot within our app itself, within the Kist app. This is what is funneling around 70% of the customer support queries are coming through the chatbot. Of the queries that come in through this chatbot, and sorry, just the other form is a WhatsApp chatbot, which is for customers who've interacted with Kist and for some reason have not, don't want, like a couple of days later, they find it much easier to communicate with us through WhatsApp rather than opening another app and, messaging Kist or finding the chatbot. On WhatsApp, immediately customer gets a message from us saying, welcome to Kist. And customer can just use this channel to communicate with us. And WhatsApp, again, has been a game changer, right? Because for a large population, you don't have to teach them WhatsApp. WhatsApp is now coming as one of the assumptions you can make about customers that, okay, the customer knows how to work WhatsApp. So for the customer base that we serve, expectation of them being familiar with going to the Kist app, going to the support section, searching for a chatbot, it's a lower bar for them, and it's on WhatsApp. Now, all of these communications, whether they're coming from the chatbot in the app or from the WhatsApp, they all funnel back into a single bot platform that we have. And this bot platform is able to resolve around 92% of all queries automatically without having to hand over to a human. Only 8% of these queries get handed over to a human customer support. And out of this 8%, only 10% end up going to end teams, like the engineering team or the product team. The rest can also be resolved by the customer support team itself. So with that funnel, you get an idea that, what it would have taken for us to not have the bots in place versus the difference because of the bots being here.
Absolutely. And of course, driving app downloads is a bigger challenge than it appears to be, because at the end of the day, it's sort of like a marriage, right, with the customer, because on a web, it might be a temporary meetup, but an app download is more like a long-term association. I'll come to you for expanding on that later in the conversation, Karan. Meanwhile, I'll shift focus to Manisha and the healthcare sector experience. Manisha, now more than ever, patients find themselves relying on a digital-first approach to healthcare, an arrangement that at first might not involve a human on the other end of the exchange. But in the healthcare space, the human touch is still seen as important. So how do bots bridge that human-AI divide to personalize the experience for patients? And also, a single bad experience with an automated customer service platform can quickly turn patients off, right, to, say, enterprise AI solutions itself as a whole. So how do you prevent that? If you could unmute yourself. Yes.
Yeah. So see, the first thing first, right? I mean, in this whole hyper-connected world, right? I mean, healthcare, contextualizing healthcare, making it intelligent with respect to supporting the patients, right? And this is something not very different than what Beirut and Prabal were talking about, right? End of the day, it is about customer experience, and in the healthcare world, it is patients, and it's not just the patients, right? Even physicians, even healthcare payers are in some ways your customers, right? So there's variety of scenarios where, and let's just focus on patients for today, right? So and it's not only bots. Okay, so bots is just one aspect of it, where you may have an intelligent bot which is unsupervised and is probably just tasked to do certain things. Like, okay, as a patient, I'm probably logging into a hospital's website and maybe looking for an annual health checkup, and there's an unsupervised bot which probably has a standard way of reacting to your questions, right? And it will only give you a couple. So it's an option-based chatbot. So personally, like if you ask me, right, it doesn't give me a good experience because it is not helping me get to that response that I am looking for, right? So it will have some standard options, and you need to just deal with those options. That, okay, do you want for an annual health checkup, or are you looking for some specific kind of test, etc., right? So honestly, as a patient, I will get put off, right? Because either I would rather pick up a phone and just fix an appointment, but if you're providing me that experience, it better be more personalized. Something which even Prabal was talking about, right? So to me, one thing is that when you're providing conversational bots, right, how do you make it more personalized? Now there are a variety of scenarios through which you can do that. Now, obviously, wearables, smartwatches, Fitbits, even the devices where you could measure your oxygen levels. You have blood pressure devices, diabetes, whatnot, right? So these all devices today are in some or the other way, connected to IoT, to Wi-Fi, and whatnot, right? Now, and by the way, in our world, in the healthcare world, we call it IoMT, right? So it is Internet of Medical Things, right? So these devices can very well be connected. Most of the devices are Wi-Fi enabled, but if they are not, you could definitely, embed some chips and, extract data from these devices. That's one aspect of it. You're getting live data, right, from the patient's wearables. Obviously, they're probably connected to a hospital system or a clinical system. Two, what do you do with this data, right? So here's where, hospitals or clinics can make good use of this data and contextualize a patient experience. So now, when I, as a hospital system, and maybe in the Indian healthcare context, this may not probably be as applicable or as impactful, right? But when you're talking about Europe and US, where all all health records of patients are, monitored and captured in an electronic health record system. They call it EHR, and it is gaining attention in India as well. But this is where the moment you have your health record already present in a certain database, and now you're getting live data from the patient's wearables, right? You could reconcile that data. You would know that, okay, this patient is probably a chronic patient of so-and-so condition, maybe hypertension or diabetes or whatnot. And if that kind of a patient is, logging onto the website, the chances are they're either looking for an appointment or they're looking for their regular checkups, and you contextualize it. Okay, your last appointment was so-and-so date. Are you sure you want an appointment? Okay, your nearest physician or your preferred, scanning center is so-and-so. That is how you make it more personalized, because now the chatbots are giving me the responses that I want to listen to, right? You're giving me what are the next possible dates for a preferred location, or you're giving me options that, maybe the preferred location is not available, then so-and-so location is available for you, right? You can get all this information through phone, through wearable devices, and personalize it. That is what will, be impactful for patients.
All right. And in the context of, say, the digital transformation stories that CTS has enabled, any interesting examples you could state in the context of what you said?
So I'll give you a specific example, right? So again, this is probably going to be more contextual, not for the Indian healthcare, but in the US, right? Every patient has to have an insurance. They have to be associated to, certain payer like a Cigna or, or Tata AIG in Indian context, right? They have to have some insurance. Okay. Now, when you look for an appointment, okay, you can't just walk in. I mean, obviously there's urgent care, emergency care, and you can walk in and, you could, be attended to. But if it's an appointment, let's say dental appointment or, an eye checkup or whatever, right? You have to make sure that you're going to physicians who are in that network. Now, as a patient, I don't care which provider or which physician or which clinic is part of my payer network. I'm not going to keep that information with me, right? So what can the payers do for them, right? So the payers provide them with something called as patient portal. It's a web application where patients, now they know that this patient is associated to my insurance, right? And obviously the payers know who their connected providers are. Now, how can they personalize the experience for them? How can they improve their members' experience, right? Is in the following way. As a patient, if I have, let's say, moved from one state to another state, now I don't know who are the preferred providers in that location. What I would do, I will either Google which is the nearest, physician. There are chances that that physician may be out of that network, which means the physician that the payers are not connected. I may go to that physician, maybe take an appointment, but it will not be a cashless experience for me. Then you have to go through a different workflow of claims and whatnot. Now, if I was a payer, right, and if you move from one state to another, and if I'm giving you a patient portal, which is either available on your phone, is available on your, other devices, what I'll do for you is the moment you say, I am looking for an appointment for so-and-so medical condition, they first have your complete health record context. Second, they know that you moved from one location to another. They'll quickly give you the most relevant physician, clinic in context of, nearest to your house, in context of, obviously in network, in context of who are the preferred physicians that you generally go to in terms of specialists, etc. Right? So the experience that I'm talking about is by having these patient portal kind of applications easily available on the phone, right? And contextualizing it that, okay, this particular member of mine has moved from one state to another, and they have a certain preference, they wouldn't mind driving, but they only look for weekend appointments versus a certain patients which are probably retired patients, and they may or may not want a weekend, but they want a certain morning slot or a certain evening slot, right? So you contextualize it in that way, and that way you're reducing their whole burden of Googling or just filtering through information to get to the right appointment.
Absolutely. It's the context of the data that you use that matters, because it creates those customer journeys which actually feel relevant.
That data? How do you mine that data, and how do you contextualize it when your patient is looking for a certain help or certain information?
Absolutely. And that's where the magic is, where the patient feels that, they know me better than myself.
Of course, and from a payer's perspective, right, it's such a competitive world there, right, that member retention is very, very important. It's a very, very important metric, right, that a member shouldn't leave my, subscription and insurance plan and go to another payer company, right? That's a very, very important metric for them. And the more you make it more personalized and easy, right, the member would stick with you.
All right.
The patient would stick with you. So
absolutely, that's a great point, and I'll come to Praval for that. Praval, considering we are in a hyper competitive world where gaining customers and holding on to them is tougher than ever, and since Zoho powers businesses that run the wider ecosystem, have you been getting a lot of feedback around, say, building customer conversation capabilities or hyper personalization capabilities so that they can service your customers can service their customers better?
Absolutely. As a company that enables other businesses to do better across all functions, from sales, marketing, HR, back office, front office, all of that, customer experience, in itself has picked up a lot. And I think the pandemic has, in a way, only accelerated digital experiences. Right? For example, the one that we're having right now, this. In a different world, this would have probably been in a room. We all would have been in a room. Now we are interacting over a 2D interface. So that is what we are seeing in terms of demand, in terms of transformation as well. And tools are enabling that, and CX is part of that. But to add to that, I think oftentimes what we as a company and our customers as their own companies, we've realized is it's important to understand that when you are trying to optimize your experience across all touch points, how are you structuring your data in the sense, what is the single source of truth for across your marketing, sales, support, I think Birud or someone said, about pre-sales, post-sales, all of that, right? How are you structuring that data is equally important. And I think from a technology standpoint, that is what a CX platform, a customer experience platform, enables. And for a conversational messaging platform to be totally useful and to play to its potential, I think a conversational messaging platform should integrate, or if not, then sit on top of a CX platform, rather seamlessly. And I'll give an example to sort of illustrate that. So let's say you have a visitor on your website. Now, how much do you know about that visitor already? Do you know if that visitor is a customer or is a first-time visitor? If she's a customer, do you know if she has open support tickets in your system, right? Do you have that information? Or are there any potentials or deals open right now about that visitor? You may want to treat that visitor differently than others for that matter, right? Either manually or via automation, but that's something that you would want to differentiate on. Or what kind of social interactions you've had across Twitter or Facebook or wherever else with that particular visitor. So that kind of visitor level data, and then of course there's visitor tracking and chatbots and everything that comes into the play from a technology standpoint. The other important point from a concern, is, and often I would say in India, we don't talk about it as much as it is talked about in European countries and other parts of the world, is the balancing act of privacy and customer experience, right? See, what's happening is, and it goes back deep into the business model of a company, right? In the name of personalized experience, how much of their privacy is your user compromising? Or in other words, businesses need to ensure that when you implement a conversational messaging platform, what kind of data are you asking for? Whether it's through bots, usually it's a bot, right? But what kind of data are you asking for? Is it required and relevant? Or I mean, I'll give an example. I was at a store the other day and wanted to pick up a cup of chai. The shop wanted me to give my phone number and whatnot to give me a cup of chai. I mean, sure, I understand why they want that. But again, we somewhere have to draw that line, right? That in the name, just because the technology exists, it doesn't mean that everybody is comfortable giving their data on that, right? And then again, do I trust you as a company to be able to do that is again another question. So I think in today's age, it's the responsibility of the business to respect users' data. And then not just data collection, but how it's transmitted, how it's stored. Are customers aware of their rights with the data? I think a lot of education still needs to be done in India around those subjects, right? So that's my other thing where, and in a way, it boils down to the business model of the company. Is my business thriving on user data? Am I using that data to serve you ads? Am I using that data to sell it to third parties to make money? Is that what my business model is? And if it is, will the customer want to share that data with me, regardless of what is the conversational messaging platform, what is the CX platform? Absolutely. So that's the core fundamental which we often ignore. And I think in today's world, a lot of businesses also want you to ignore that. They don't talk about it enough. So we at Zoho have a very strong sort of, principles on privacy as our ethics. So that's one thing. And the other part, which I mentioned earlier as well, in all this talk of customer experience and conversational messaging, we often ignore the employee experience part of it, which I mentioned. How do you increase adoption? How do you make sure that implementation is easy? How do you make sure that a CX platform or a CRM for that matter is customized for that vertical, like the needs of a manufacturing company versus a real estate company for that matter, right? And like I said, we believe strongly in that, and we've been working in terms of R&D on that area as well. And in fact, I would use the opportunity to bring up Canvas, which is I would say industry's first CRM design studio that we launched, which makes businesses or individuals essentially drag and drop and create their own CRM view based on the industry that they are in, based on their own processes, based on their work culture, sales process. All this varies from company A to company B. And everybody was so far sort of, you have to buy a piece of technology, a CRM, it's stuck on the wall, you're going to use it. But we are trying to change that and make it personalized for employees to be able to make use of it. And only when they can make use of their own technology better, they can offer exceptional customer experiences to their customer. So I think these
but
are
customizable.
Exactly. So unless you are skilled and enabled to be able to solve for customer experience, how do you expect your employees to do that? So that is what we sort of launched Canvas for Zoho CRM earlier this month for businesses of all sizes, and we are seeing tremendous response. So there is a need for that as well, and EX plays well with CX. Is what
Absolutely. Some great points you've raised there, Praval, and I especially want to talk about the aspect you raised about privacy, and I'll go around the table to get everyone's views on this. Starting with Karan, then Manisha, and then Beerad's views on this. Karan, in today's day and age of data sensitivity, businesses do need to ensure that bots only ask for data which is relevant and required, as Praval mentioned. So how do you secure the process of data transmission and collection so that your customers are ensured of the safety of the data shared with Kisht?
Incredibly important point. I think we do a lot of discussions about digital first customer experience, seamless customer experience. The hidden underlying pillar of all of this has to be customer privacy and customer handling sensitive data in the right manner. And it's very good that we're discussing it right now. It just does not get discussed enough. I think from a privacy perspective, for companies of all shapes, sizes, domains, it is super important, have to be thinking of customer privacy first. The government is taking the first steps towards the right privacy bills, but as much as the regulatory framework can do, what it has to come as a DNA from within the company. Just to give you some context, within Kisht, we always think of privacy first and handling of the PII, the personally identifiable information, and sensitive data of the customer in a very, very strong manner. Very similar to what Manisha talked about, in the healthcare space, the data is very sensitive. Similar to us, lending companies and fintechs hold a large trove of data of the customer, right? Their KYC data, their credit history, a lot of documents then can be used for nefarious purposes. So for us, one of the philosophies is whenever we are building a product in-house, we are always thinking of privacy and security as a forethought rather than an afterthought. It goes into the design process itself. One example I can give you at Kisht is the CEO or the CTO, myself. I actually can't access the PII data and the sensitive data of the customers once it's gone into our database. When there has been a special process created for our auditors to get access to the data, but that process excludes me from getting, any form of access to the data. But it comes from this thought of privacy first. Whenever we are building products, we are building products in a manner where we are thinking, how do we do that to achieve our business goals, to give the customer a very seamless experience, but not violating his privacy. When we are processing, we have a large engineering effort built on taking the digital data of the customer that resides on his phone and using that for credit decisioning. This is specifically for customers who don't have a great credit history or have no credit history. But we've actually taken great pains to make sure that we do the processing on the device of the customer itself. So the code is on the Android app, and only the signals are passed back to the server. The server is never going to know what was the underlying data processed or the sensitive data of the customer to even know why the system gave it. But we have trust in our code and we want to respect the customer's privacy. Now, a large point of all of this is, again, it just has to come at a DNA level for the company. But when you talk about bots, now all of a sudden there is this, there is a third party that comes into the mix. You are now having your customers interact to your systems through a company like Zoho, or for us, we have we have companies that we have partnered for bots that are building the AI bots and everything. So all of a sudden now the data is passing through a couple of intermediaries. At a company level, we obviously are tying up with companies where we do have a belief that these third-party companies we are tying up with have the same respect for the customer's data privacy that we do. But more importantly, there are a lot of checks, balances, and processes you can place to make sure that no extra sensitive data more than what is required is ever passed to that system. One example of that is whenever the data is exchanged to the chatbots, there is a reference number, a uniquely identifiable reference number on the customer's device that gets passed from the device through the third party to our servers, whereas the third party in between has actually no context of what that reference number means. But it allows us to identify, okay, this is Karan Mehta, his date of birth is XYZ, he was not eligible for a loan because his CIBIL score was too low or something like that. And all of this processing happens at our end, whereas the intermediary third party, which is making these bots possible for us, a company like Case can't spend time and energy to build a bot. That is not our core competency. So we rely on these third parties, but we're able to build it in a manner where the sensitive data resides with us. Still, the customer experience is absolutely seamless for the customer. And again, all of this requires a lot of architecting with privacy and sensitivity in mind first, and also having partners. And I mean, the market does have a lot of partners who understand this pain point. They also are on the same table saying that we want to make your workflows seamless, and we still don't want to touch data. So they actually go above and beyond. They find models of processes where we are able to achieve all of this with the minimum amount of customer sensitive information passing through their systems.
All right. I'll get Beerad's response to that. But before that, let me come to Manisha. Manisha, you spoke earlier about the balance, and especially in the context of bots that we're discussing. How do you ensure that, the privacy is maintained and bots only ask for data which is relevant and required, especially considering the volume of data we saw in the healthcare space during the pandemic?
Yeah, so in fact, I wanted to add to what Prabal was, talking about. But, anyways, I just to add to, what a panelist are talking about, right? So data privacy, specifically in healthcare context, right? As Karan was talking about, PII information, the personally identifiable information, or in the context of healthcare, we also call it PHI, so, which is the patient's healthcare, identification information, right? So, for us, it's a very sensitive, topic, right? In the context of even legal, impacts. So, in the US, there's something called as HIPAA, right, which is a privacy law. In fact, in Europe, I'm sure you guys would have heard about GDPR, right, the Data Privacy Acts, right? So, in that context, specifically for companies like CTS Tech, who are only doing healthcare, who are catering to customers in the US and Europe, and given that we're a services company, right, we don't have our own products or solutions except for a couple of them, right? For us, we're literally working in the customer's environment, right, remotely through VPNs, etc., right? And obviously, we have access to their data, right? So for us, it's like a bread and butter situation, right? We better handle the data very well. Now, before I come to the technology aspect of it, let me tell you from a workflow perspective. So the examples that I gave, right, that a patient is looking for a specific, physician or provider in their area. Now they're logging into a payer's portal, or let's say there is a mobile care decision support application that they have, where a physician and the patients can communicate, right? Obviously, there would be talk of medical condition, or what are they suffering from, etc. Right? So this healthcare information of a patient has to be dealt with a lot of sensitivity, and there are strict regulations like HIPAA, right, in the US, where you cannot discuss a patient's health information even when you're in the room with the patient. You cannot discuss openly about that information with, maybe there's another caregiver in the room, or maybe the patient has been accompanied or with a friend, etc. Right? Having patient's consent is very important, right? So the same patient consent, right, when you're in the room and you're talking to them, the same consent is actually captured in the workflows as well, right? So for example, when a chatbot is asking you specific questions, right, even before that happens, a patient consent is taken. That information is captured, that the patient is okay to share specific information, and only then the conversation becomes more personalized or contextualized. Till then, it is more generic information, right? Now, this is from a patient's perspective. Now, technologically, how does a company like CTS Tech handle this, right? So, like when our teammates are working on solutions to make them more secure, for example, moving healthcare data to cloud, right? Now, as your AWS, obviously they have their own data and security controls in place, right? But how do you customize it in context of healthcare? How do you make sure that your teammates, when they're working on customer solutions, when they're handling customer data, right? How do you ensure that there is no data leakage? And at the same time, see, you cannot build a data management solution, right? You cannot validate it without really touching the production data. But at the same time, how do you balance the fact that the data cannot be leaked, the data has to be secured, right? So there are certain workflows that as a company we implement. So we have a very strong information security, business unit, right? And the only job of the information security business unit is to make sure physical, administrative, and technical controls are in place. So if I am a teammate working on a project which enables me to access production data, right? Then I would be in an ODC setup, which is secured. There's somebody sitting outside the room. You can't carry your camera phones. At the max, you may have a smart, basic phone with you. Your desktops will not have cameras. You'll not be able to take screen prints, etc. Right? So all those, administrative and technical safeguards are in control, right? Similarly, if I am entering that ODC space, if I am not associated with that project, I can't enter that space. That's an example of a physical safeguard, right? So we have to implement these physical, technical, and administrative safeguards and controls, right? And by the way, they're all governed by HIPAA laws. They're all governed by GDPR. So if you're a company who's handling healthcare data and you're, dealing with Europe and US customers, right? Then you have to implement these laws. Over and above that, as a company, we ensure that, like, for example, in a pandemic scenario, now ODCs, obviously you could not, operate through ODCs, right? You could not force them to come and, work from office, but the show must run, the show must go on, right? So then we actually interacted with the customers. We got some special NDAs signed. We made sure that, our employees are all, comfortable accessing laptops. There are screen guards on their laptops, etc., so that nobody else can take a picture, etc., right? And obviously, there we had to take that risk versus, make sure that the business is on. Until date, we've had not had a single scenario where, PHI information was compromised, right? So it's even the employees, as I think Karan was talking about, right? It has to be in the DNA of the company. The employees are also responsible. We do refreshers of, these HIPAA laws, etc., right? So those refreshers happen every quarter so that everybody is responsible, everybody is accountable for the work that they do.
All right. Security in the DNA of a company, that's almost now a given.
Absolutely required. Yeah, it's absolutely.
All right. Fair point. Pirat, let me bring you in, as Karan was stating earlier, the fact that now companies are more open to, say, an open platform where they work with third-party providers. And it's a sort of a smart compartmentalization of data where the company, which is dealing directly with customers, gets to see some data. And let's say they are using a third-party conversational messaging platform that gets to see data without context, in a way protecting the customer's data. So in a sense, tell us more about the capabilities that these conversational messaging platforms like Gupshup bring to the table, especially when looking at it from a third party provider which integrates with, say, a company's already existing data.
No, I think obviously we work with a wide variety of customers. Some are in regulated industries, some are not. Some have extremely tight security policies, while others maybe less so, right? So ultimately, platforms like ours, or at least we, offer a wide variety of solutions depending on what the preferences are, right? So one is at an infrastructure level, we've federated our whole platform architecture, which means we can really put the whole platform in different regions. So, for example, in Europe for GDPR compliance, or in LATAM for their basically data localization in different countries, we can replicate the whole platform. But to take it further, we can even set it up on-prem, right? Which means it could belong to just one company and nobody else even has access to it. So of course it's still a platform, we maintain it, but on a day-to-day basis, even we don't have access to it while they're using it, right? So that's sort of at the infrastructure layer. And then even in terms of the product and feature capability, in these messaging channels, we have mechanisms where you can have, for example, an expiring message, kind of like Snapchat, right? So or a single view message, meaning you can view the message and after 15 seconds it disappears. So you see it once, but after that, there's no trail on your device. If somebody finds your device later, they can't look at any of that data either, right? I mean, that's one example. Or it could be sort of a variation of the thing that Karan was talking about, which is, you sort of pass encrypted tokens which refer to some data, but we don't have access to the data. Only the customer and the enterprise have that data. And I think this is such an important point, because today, for example, a lot of these messages go through SMS, and SMS is not, I mean, ultimately, there's no way to encrypt content in the messaging payload, right? So that's where all these richer messaging channels that we provide have the ability to, do various levels of security and privacy, so that only the user and or the enterprise has access to the data, and the platforms can work just fine, right? So these are the many different ways in which we handle these sort of requirements.
Absolutely. It's the platform that matters as well, especially considering the capabilities that it brings to the table. Heading into the final leg of this conversation, Manisha, let me quickly ask you, being available to handle customer queries even outside of business hours is something chatbots can do better than customer service teams. So if you could share a use case, especially from the healthcare space, when an emergency can come knocking at the door at any hour and a chatbot helps mitigate the situation. You're on mute, Manisha. If you could unmute yourself.
Sorry about that, and thank you for reminding. So, see, first of all, if there's a medical emergency, my sincere, perspective is that, obviously don't rely on devices, and obviously do what is the next best action for you, right? So either you are.
So we are not there. Are you saying we are not there yet in terms of
I see. So it all depends on the criticality of the emergency, right? If the emergency is, from a condition perspective, is low, where it's not that you have to rush to a hospital off business hours, but maybe you need certain level of clinical decision support. And now maybe the visiting hours are done, and you may want to reach out to the physician for a specific, maybe a query or help, right? For example, it could be, women population, or women who are probably pregnant, and maybe there is the need of hour could be that they probably just want to talk to their gynecologist, right? It could even be an emotional support more than a clinical support, right? So how do you deal with that? So for those kind of scenarios, right, again, there are bots, conversational bots, right, which basically, again, it goes back to the same question that obviously you maintain the medical history of the patient. You know the patient very well based on the healthcare data. You analyze that data and you maintain a certain preference and a certain context of that patient. And then accordingly, these clinical decision supports, which are probably more than bots, right? So they are not just RPA bots, but those are like those conversational AI, tools, right? And we call it clinical decision support tools in context of healthcare, where these tools could, very well give you a first line of support with respect to information. The information could be, maybe you developed an allergy while you took the medication. Now, what do you do about it? Do I really need to go rush toward urgent care? Depending on the criticality of the allergy, right? Is it a rash, or, are you facing, problems in breathing or whatever, right? So if it is a breathing scenario, obviously you rush to the hospital. That is what the bot will tell you. But if it's a rash, maybe they would give you an over-the-counter prescription, something that you can pick it up, right? So that kind of clinical decision support can be provided by this conversational AI bots, right? Now, this can be done to a larger extent, as I said, depending on the criticality of the conditions. But I wouldn't recommend that if it's a medical emergency, which is life-threatening, you should be relying on these. You should just be, either calling 911 in the US, or just calling a 101 for ambulance, right? And making sure that you reach the urgent care. Now, to the previous point, right, I also wanted to share a challenge about, when you say conversational AI bots, access to data, right? The moment you put in this physical controls and access controls in place with respect to data. Now, let's say I'm a data scientist, and I want access to this data, right? Because I want to do some meaningful research on this data, and maybe I want to predict a chronic condition. for a certain patient cohort. Maybe a patient cohort is diabetic, and I may want to, obviously, diabetic patients are, more vulnerable to developing comorbidities. They would be at risk for heart conditions or, chronic kidney failure, right? Now, how do I utilize this data, right? But am I authorized to access this data? Now, what do? I have an intent that I want to develop predict a condition kind of a tool, right? But I can't access this data because I'm not authorized to do. What will you do in those scenarios, right? All your AI principles, bots are going to be, they are at the mercy of the data, but I can't give you the data because you're not authorized to access the data. In those scenarios, right, this concept of data scrambling, this concept of expert determination, right? So a lot of healthcare organizations today make use of that how much level of risk can I take and how much of data can I unlock for research purposes, right? Okay. So that is one angle in the US, in the European regions, right? Where they have this concept of expert determination, they have this concept of safe harbor techniques, where organizations unlock data for a certain level of research, and they know what is the level of risk that they're taking. Right? So you balance the risk between the utility of the data, right? Because for conversational AI or for any kind of AI, the utility of the data is also very important. So when organizations are thinking about data privacy, and when they're thinking about developing this contextualized conversational AI, personalized AI, right? You also have to think of a strategy where how do you maintain the balance between the risk and the utility of the data? Otherwise, if the data is completely de-identified, that's of no use for research. That's of no use for contextualization, right? So you have to think of that strategy as well.
Risk versus utility is a great point, and I want to bring in Praval. Yes. I mean, I understand from the healthcare space, conversational AI for emergencies, it might be too early, but from a broader ecosystem, Praval, do you see conversational messaging tools which offer instant gratification to queries and concerns, and also personalizing the CX in real time, growing in terms of its use in India? I understand the point in healthcare, where in emergencies it might not work, but for the broader business ecosystem where conversations need to be quick, what's your view on that?
Yeah, Manisha, you have a good example of the limitations of conversational messaging in certain situations. I think that extends to the larger ecosystem as well beyond healthcare. Of course, healthcare is a lot more sensitive, and it's oftentimes it could be a matter of life and death. But in case of businesses, I think that different kinds of conversations for which I would say something like a chatbot works really well, which could be answers to questions that are frequently asked, that could be siphoned from a knowledge base powered by a chatbot, an intelligent, smart chatbot. B, running things like collecting user surveys, for example, around a particular product use case or a need or a launch or things like that, where when a user sees your chatbot, then they're not surprised by it. They were probably not expecting a human interaction for that particular thing, right? In that case, I think a well-designed, a well-crafted chatbot works really well. And again, there are situations like when I'm on your website looking to buy something and I have a set of questions, I may not want to pick up the phone and call and get to the whole line and get to a human being, right? And I just have a few questions, which if a chatbot can solve, can answer those questions rather quickly, I would be happy to it. And then that sort of elevates my experience on your website for that matter. But again, there are chances. I mean, I would give examples of typical banks in India, most of them, I would say, right? I'm your customer for 10 years. You probably know a lot about me than some of my friends would, for my transaction history and whatnot. And yet, the experience that they offer across all touch points that we've talked about is subpar, because I often give banks as a not so good example or a poor example of delivering customer experience, not because of the human capability, but because their systems are not designed that way. They've not worked on their systems to behave that way. But again, even the new age banks are sort of leveraging that opportunity. The digital banks, digital first banks, I should say, are leveraging that opportunity. And we've seen how the nation has transformed itself in the last several years of using digital currency and how people, all of us, take out our phone and are very comfortable making a payment rather quickly on the phone, right? So I think these experiences are across all touch points, including not just web and social and email, but even connected devices and all of that. So yes, conversational messaging as a platform is very, very useful. But again, we have to see which use cases are they suited better for, and which use cases and customers would still want to speak with a real human being.
Understood. Point taken. Karan, let me bring you in from a financial services industry perspective. Do you see conversational messaging becoming more core? Are you more optimistic about its prospects? We heard of some of the challenges which come from the healthcare space or some of the concerns from the broader business ecosystem. But we've seen the financial services space being more embracing and structuring data in a way that's easier for even core operations to be at the edge when interacting with customers. And since speed is of the essence for Kisht, what's your view on this? On conversational AI becoming the core of the customer experience?
No, absolutely. I think we are already seeing the early trends across all domains of fintech and financial services, insurance, lending, neo-banking. Everyone is embracing it. It solves a real problem. At least that's the sum total of what I would want to suggest is it's not a fancy fad that has come in and some people are experimenting with it. Earlier, it looked like that. But I think it has solved a lot of challenges. The challenges of wanting to be digital, wanting to be, pan-India scale, wanting to have bite-sized products. You're talking about earlier loans used to be on an average 7-8 lakhs personal loans. Now the average ticket size of loans is 30-40,000. So the profitability per loan is smaller. Insurance have gone from term life insurance to bite-sized insurances, and so on and so forth. Everyone is now providing these bite-sized products. Profitability is a question mark. You can't add cost of customer support to it. So bots are allowing a lot more products to be even feasible to begin with. And I think the entire financial services industry has seen that they're embracing it, and very rightfully so. We are yet to see, I think there are going to be a couple of things that are going to also happen going forward. One is there are going to be products that are bought first. There are certain lending players who've tried to do it where you can take a loan directly by just chatting, not have a form fill up or anything like that. I think we'll see more evolved versions of that. And at some level, this will get integrated into your WhatsApp. It will get integrated into so many other places where you interact normally, that buying products or consuming financial services will become very, very invisible to you because they'll be powered by these bots. And the second thing, at least one thing about bots that yet is to be truly fully realized, is in India, there is this challenge of vernacular languages. We are not talking about English, Hindi, or Hinglish. By the way, just a fun fact for Kisht call centers, the largest preferred language is what we call Hinglish. But still, there is a large segment of the population that's coming from the southern parts, from the northeastern parts. They want these bots to be also in their languages, and that's a big road we have to journey through. But we started seeing some initial investments coming in from the bigger, artificial intelligence and natural language processing companies as well. And I believe it's going to be a slightly longer journey before we have full coverage in India. But the trends are there. The financial services are embracing it. And I think they will become more and more mainstay, and there will be more interesting products built around it.
All right, let me get the last word in from Birat. Birat, Karan is more optimistic about the possibilities that chatbots offer. And today, chatbots are all pervasive at different stages of the customer journey, right? From brand awareness to buying products or services, and after sales services or evaluations, say about the quality of service and the level of personalization. So do you think this disruption is here to stay?
Oh, absolutely. I think, we are seeing the same trends that Karan was referring to, right? Which is certainly in fintech, in e-commerce. I mean, that's where the early adopters are, where they're building these sort of conversational experiences that enable, sort of the pre-sales, the sales, and the post-sales, sort of the whole customer life cycle process. And they do it with increasing amounts of intelligence, right? So these are still early days in terms of AI being deployed fully. And it's not just the technology of AI, but also the way it's used and deeply embedded into the business process and so on, right? So it'll take some time for businesses to get better at using it. But I think they're certainly getting good over time. And in any cases, bots, I think like Praval was saying earlier, bots have to be careful to escalate to a human when they cannot handle it, right? When the query is above their ability to handle. So if you have a hybrid solution where there's an 80-20, right? Some queries, the frequently asked queries are automated, the advanced queries are offloaded to a human agent, right? So ultimately, the easy queries have quick, instant responses, while the advanced queries have human responses. So there's no customer dissatisfaction in the whole experience, right? And then, so that's a way to manage that, manage the customer satisfaction. Data privacy, we discussed that earlier. So if that's taken care of by leveraging some of these features that I mentioned earlier, and then sort of gradually getting in there, right? Maybe the only other thing I'll mention is there's also a trend away from apps to sort of messaging first or messaging only experiences, right? And we've seen this in China, where, like, instead of giant monolithic apps, a lot of people create these WeChat mini programs, right, that offer the transient experience. And even we've seen that. A simple example is, like, while UPI payment apps are very popular, but we've enabled sort of one-click bill pay, right? When you have a bill payment reminder, you want to be able to just pay that bill once, and the fastest and the easiest you can make it without having to go into the app, the better it is, right? So if you can just sort of disaggregate these experiences from the app and make it available quickly, easily, inexpensively, then there's a lot of customer delight. And also for businesses, by the way, these are less expensive to develop. There's nothing to download. So you can actually reach more users rather than create this sort of barrier, the download barrier, right? So I think you're just certainly, I mean, to your key question, I think we're seeing there's a lot of data points where businesses are moving very aggressively to adopting these messaging-based technologies, because it just makes business sense. The economics are great. The user experience is delightful. You can reach more users. You can transact better and cheaper, and so on. So I think all the forces are aligned towards this gaining more traction.
Absolutely. And I guess on the back of the mind, you also have to remember that when you talk the talk, you make sure you walk the walk during your engagement with customers, because at the end of the day, it's the utility versus value factor which determines a customer's relationship with you. On that note, it's time to wrap up this second in a series of Mint CX conversations. I'd like to thank all the panelists for sharing their thoughts and experiences on today's topic of conversational AI, cracking the code to intelligent conversations, presented by Mint and Gupshup. Now, these talks with captains of industry around CX will continue and culminate into a grand meeting of the minds with the thought leaders at the Mint India CX Summit. Keep tuning into Mint to discover the secrets to success when it comes to customer engagement. This is Gautam Srinivasan signing off.
Thank you.